Our theme is poetry and the people, and every year the Tucson Poetry Festival Board gets together and we kind of come up with the theme, thinking about what is relevant, what the community needs to hear, what we need to hear in our own individual lives. And we actually came up with this theme back in August, poetry and the people. This, for me, like my inspiration towards it is I'm not always the best. I forget who said it. Someone said hearing poetry is difficult. It is. Sometimes for me, I'm like, understanding poetry is difficult. So I've never been like there's times in my life where I've been intimidated by poetry. So for me, like my original thought around the theme was that I wanted to create spaces that were accessible to non-poets or people who didn't identify as poets, because so often in poetry and literary spaces, we end up being at performance with poets who listen to poets who are reading to poets, and that's great. I love poets. I've dated a couple. We're not dating anymore. Okay. No, but it was about accessibility. But it was so interesting how the year developed, how the election happened, and how really, which didn't change that much. It just illuminated what was already there and made people aware that. I really like what Natalie said during the panel, which is like, it's been all good to be empathic, but now we have to act. We can't get away with it anymore. So, a little story for you. So, as I was thinking about the theme as it's developed over this time, I was thinking when I think about people, I can't think about people without thinking about bodies. And like 6 months ago, I did something for the first time. It might have been longer than that. I went to an ecstatic dance class. Which there's a couple like very uncomfortable aspects to an ecstatic dance class. Like one, it's like a lot of like older to middle-aged like white people dancing to world music, and then there's me trying to dance to world music, but mostly feeling very uncomfortable. I kind of set goals for myself throughout the evening. As like song one with its drum beats went by, I said I'm going to move 3 feet by the end of this song eventually, and I did. And then I set another goal that eventually I would somehow dance, but it wasn't really a dance. It was kind of like me like limping across the dance floor, where like people just like joyously danced around me, just letting go, like that Disney movie. Eventually, like I moved across the dance floor, but it was really uncomfortable, horrifically uncomfortable. And at some point, I let go. And after the class, I was talking to my former partner who I was with, and we were driving home, and I said this statement. I heard myself say it. I said, "Why is it so hard to be a body in a room full of bodies?" And then I just I wept. But when we're in the world, we're not person, we're people. And that is kind of sometimes the hardest thing about being in the world, is having a body and interacting with the other bodies around us. And when I think about poetry and the people, when I think about poetry and I think about bodies, I think about my grandmother's body. So my grandmother had a stroke back in November, and I've written poetry for years now, and a lot of it's been because of those poets that broke my heart. I had to write a poem when they broke my heart. Like my inspiration to write poetry has been some catalyst of heartbreak. And as I've been watching my grandmother in her bed, going through something that we're all going to go through, we're all going to die. Something that, it quotes a little bit out of the context, but Sherry Moraga would say is common as corn, the death of another person, someone that we came from. Something that in the midst of all this shit that is happening in the world is still happening, has happened, will happen. And I have a moment with her. And my grandmother, who I don't think has known me my whole life till now, till this moment when she's in a bed and she's dying, and I'm holding some part of her in me, and I'm living, and I will keep living. I'm in that part of my life where I'm so caught up in my life I can't help but living, and she cups my face. She never has touched my face like that. And all I wanted to do was write a poem. I had to write a poem. I had to. The poems are in me watching her through this process. We as people in this room, my grandmother, who used to want to be a writer and would write these editor notes into the Arizona Daily Republic, commenting on things and having opinions, and and me who gets to be one. And for me, that was just a really clear, it was a clear connection, right? We're in this room and we're in our own experiences. And unless we're aware of each other, we're not going to be able to like continue as a species. So I just wanted to share that on the thoughts of, you know, of what Poetry and the People has evolved into over the course of this year. And I'll say my grandmother's name. Her name is Mavis Webster. Mavis. And I'll still write that poem, but it'll be once the Tucson Poetry Festival's over, because I can't. There's not a lot of time to breathe lately. So on that note, I would love to bring to the stage our first reader of the second half, and that is Erin Mour. And I'll read a little bit about her. Go give her a round of applause, and I'll go ahead and read about her. So Erin Mour is a noted North American poet and translator of poetry and poetics. In Canada, the USA, and the UK variously, she has published 17 books of poetry, a volume of essays, a book of short articles on translation, and a memoir. And she is a translator or co-translator of 17 books of poetry and 2 of creative nonfiction, biopoetics, from French, Spanish, Galician, and Portuguese. Her work has received the Governor General's Award, Pat Lawther Memorial Award, A.M. Klein Prize twice, and has been a 3-time finalist. She's been a 3-time finalist for the Griffin Prize. Welcoming Erin to the stage now.
Hi everybody, I'd just like to thank all of you people for being here, and mention as well that it's a privilege to be invited to read among the and with the poets. Other poets who are invited here. I was very excited to come and listen to them, and all my expectations and hopes have been fulfilled. The poetry that's written here is and performed here is really wonderful stuff, and the diversity of voices as well is important to me. And it's a privilege to be on the lands of the Tohono O'odham people as well, and to learn something about these lands and that people, and hear a bit of the language too. One of the languages that I both translate from and write in is Gallego-Galician, the language of the northwest of Spain, the part that hangs over Portugal. It's the root language of modern Portugal, but they've been separated for 500 years, so you could almost say they're divorced. But they're still mutually comprehensible. And Galician itself also has a lot of influences from the Spanish language, who were the people who took over. Anyway, so there'll be, if you hear some strange words in my poems, they're Galician words. So I'm going to read you a poem called Songstress. Tres tipos de pájaros na horta manhã, os seus sons cantam sons, são cantos aí. Precious little on earth is worth such song, if we make worth a measure. Should we? Not likely. Perhaps let's walk instead, the soaked road to Sestelo, now the rain's finished. Rain's fabrica, please say it won't rain till tomorrow. Roof tiles already scattered down, persons still drenched in the road, its edges washed away. A simple diction will do. Tres tipos de pájaros. Pájaros não são pessoas de passagem, e xílgaros não são gentes que chasam por aqui. That's what birds sound like. This one's a friend poem to that one. This one's called Apples. I don't know the old slang for anything here. I only speak Latin. What is shoulder in your language? In my Latin, it's shoulder. It has 2 parts, bivalve. One fits in the caraleto of the other, a bit like a sepulchre, but not really. Listen to it spread out and upward. Listen to it wave down the Roman road. This means laughter or wings. No, not really. That's the same in my language. Really. Light spun in fallen leaves till blackbirds chunter in the leafless masaira, never eating one whole apple, pecking every apple in November with a hole. In one of the books I wrote, a character who appeared on the scene when I couldn't write poetry, Elisa San Pedrin, who's a Galician character, but she found this book in Romanian, of Romanian poetry, but she couldn't read Romanian, but she wanted to read it, so she decided to translate it into English. And people said to her, well, how can you translate into English from Romanian when you don't know Romanian? And she said, it's actually easier that way because you can't make a mistake. So I'll read you, this poem here seems to me both about writing poetry and about translation itself. It's called Splay with a Stone. Create voice with bone, tip voice with steel, die voice with a journey, clot voice with a word, and you, unconditionally, plow with a stone from the pyramids. Plow with a stone. And don't splay the earth, and don't splay it. Gather it singular, singular, without make-believe, without making time. So polite here. It's called Theatre of the Mio Shekel. I am in the little field of my mother. Her field touches oaks of the valley, and I touch the faces of my corn. Opening corn's faces so that my hands touch its braille letters. The face of the corn is all in braille. The corn wrote it. Fires will burn this evening, burn the dry husks of the corn, and I will learn to read. Sheep will wait by the trough, for they know corn's feature, corn's humility, corn's dictin, grains, granite too. These are all little poems that are little theatres. This is called Theatre of the Stones That Ran, Fontau, 1943. 1943, as you know, was the middle of the Second World War. In Galicia, it was after the end of their civil war. They weren't actively, the Spanish state was not actively involved in World War II. They were already fascist before anybody else. And the Germans had, in Galicia, in the interior of Galicia, there were wolfram mines. I forget what it's, there's another word for that. I like the name wolfram though. It's a metal that's used to harden steel, so it's used in armaments. The Germans had a big wolfram mine near where a friend of mine grew up. And since wolfram was worth money, the kids would try to go and run in the river, and they would try to steal pieces of wolfram at night and then sell them, and that's how they supported their families. But there was, and mostly the people who worked in the mine, in the wolfram mine for the Germans were Republican, which is not like American Republicans, but people who believed in a democratic nation who had been overthrown by the fascist regime and were prisoners. They were the ones who worked in the mine, so there was a prison there. So this comes from my friend's story, Theatre of the Stones That Ran. At night in the valley of Penedos Erguidos, a glint of wolfram. The uncle's job at night to touch the glint of wolfram. Wolfram brought riches for all in Fontau. They all had jobs then in Fontau. Even the prisoners worked in Fontau. The garrison eyed everyone. There was only the night left. The uncles mined the glint in the river course and stood up in the water. At night they worked each with small hands of shale and stood up in the water, climbed out of the river with the wolfram. Penedos erguidos, human uncles, tiny, and they ran. So I'll just read a piece from a diary by Chuspato, was a woman. Chus is the Galician short name for Maria Jesus. Chuspato translated 5 books of hers. She's a wonderful writer. This comes from a section of a book that's written like a diary. It's called While I'm Writing, sort of while I'm at it. I might as well tell you these things. And it's a bit of a book of poetics, a bit about writing. So, April 22nd. Writing is a language in insurrection. It produces itself in the desert by emanation, assumes the real in the insurrection of language, articulates the roar of a native tongue. The eye of a poet, psychology, is a secession, doesn't substitute, doesn't transport, it doesn't bear meaning. Aesthetics is that writing which assumes the roar of the animal, the lament of Hades, rural life buried forever. April 23. A poet spends a lifetime writing poems just so that some line, some tiny fragment enters the memory and dream of the language. As cataclysm or splendor, the poet's name is remembered. Vering, Novonaira, Hullerin, Rosalia. Or the title of a book, a minuscule snippet to reconstruct the vista or the smallest word that renews the sonic key of the language. And the ivy that cover the walls, the vegetation on the floor of the heart, flourish. April 29th. Like trudging across an open field, like a bullet that opens air as it passes, enters the flesh and takes it in and shuts over it like a nocturnal flower. Language slips sideways in the tombs, through the mouth crater, through the esophagus cavern, activates the insurrection. It's a problem of civilization. Already people can't tolerate the world we live in. No, I don't believe my poems are cryptic. I don't believe legacies are cryptic. And one of Chuspato's predecessors in the 19th century is the poet Rosalia de Castro, who I also translate, who wrote 2 big books in Galician. So I'm going to be the only poet tonight who will read a poem from the 19th century. That's like 2 centuries ago almost. Anyways, this is a poem of Rosalia de Castro's. It's about sarcasm, but wait till you get to the end. It doesn't sound like it at first. Today or tomorrow, who knows when, but maybe all too soon, they'll come to wake me, and rather than one living, they'll find one dead. All round me there will rise grievous sobs, cries of anguish, tear bursts of my children, my precious orphan babes. And I without heat, unmoving, cold, mute, unresponsive to it all. That's how I'll be when death leaves me, chilled by its breath. So farewell forever to all I loved. What dire abandon. Despite all the sarcasms there are, must be, and ever were, I never saw one to hush the living more than the humble quietude of a body dead. A kooky sense of humor. And I'm just going to close with one short poem from another Galician poet who lived from 1930 to 1999, so through much of the political upheavals and things of the 20th century, Ushio Novonaira. And one of the things that he did, he lived in a very mountainous region where people were more isolated there, and their Galician people walked everywhere there. Before they had these Galician horses, but you couldn't bring wagons or anything like that. The terrain is too mountainous, so they walked and walked and walked to get places, and because of that they saw everything up close. So everything in the landscape had a name, and every place had a name, every rock kind of had a name. So I'm just going to read one poem, just in the spirit of Ophelia, talking about the importance of naming and the names that are given to places in the landscape. So this is Ushio Novonaira in my English. High and clear lands of the Lucenza, where the far ranges stare close. Eagles soar with open wings, lifting shadow to white boulders, and the grasses golden and bleeding. I am what I see, and what sees me. Sabrero, Faro, Irribio, Cervantes, Ancares, Caparosso, Monte Otto, Rabolo, dark pinnacles of the Corel, long ranges of Oencia and Val de Ores. The heart, trapped in the ancestral silence of the peaks, feels only the presence of sun. Immensity of land and sky. Thank you.